Hey guys, Luke here from Flukes Kitesurfing, and today we're going to break down the strapless back roll. So the strapless board-off back roll is a good first trick to learn. This is the first version of a back roll, so there are different ways to do a back roll, but this is kind of the beginner version, and it's actually the first trick that I personally learned after doing the straight air. And the reason is that it's reasonably easy, and that's because with a back roll, if we're going across the wind, if the wind's at my back, to do a back roll rotation, you actually turn upwind and then spin around. So you're turning up into the wind to initiate that rotation. And because of that, you can get some of the rotation done on the water. So you can carve up into the wind, the board goes up like that, you look over your shoulder, spin around, and you can land going back down this way, which really makes it more like a 180 than a 360, or it can be. And so that allows you to actually progress from doing very small back rolls, just small 180s, getting it around, landing them, and then going higher and higher, and that makes it fun that you can start progressing just within this one trick. So the first step to doing a back roll is to be going along with medium speed, kite at about 45 degrees, eyeing up a chop. You're looking for something that will help kick the board up into the wind. As you're going along and you see that chop coming, start moving the kite slightly higher. We want to send the kite eventually as we take off to 12, but never past 12. Eye up the chop and start to carve upwind just as you're about to hit that chop. In order to carve upwind, you need to sheet out on the bar. That will actually let the board turn further up into the wind, and try and point that nose up into the wind so that as the nose of the board comes around, you load off the back foot, it tilts the board up, the nose gets into the wind, and that will actually help push the board up on and keep it on your feet. As you start to pop up off the water surface, you can sheet in slightly, and that will help you lift up into the sky. At the same time, we're going to reach down with our front hand and grab the board. As you're reaching down, try not to overreach. So let the board come up to you. And the way that you let the board come up to you is actually bringing your front knee up. So let your knee come up into the wind. That will let the board come up with your foot and essentially make it a lot easier to grab. As we start to spin, look over your shoulder and we'll be spinning around. Now the rotation was actually initiated from the carve up into the wind. So you'll already feel like you're about to spin as soon as you leave the water surface. So we go up, grab that board, and then we spin around. You can look over your shoulder, that will help you complete the rotation. And then as we're coming in, this is probably one of the parts that really requires the best timing, and that is as we start to come in for the landing, we actually move our hand out onto the edge of the bar and loop the kite around. That will give you a bit of acceleration where you can put the board down, drop it straight underneath your feet, and you'll be heading straight downwind. I've seen a lot of people back rolling, and I've seen a lot of people that seem to struggle with it, and from that, and I've seen what other people are saying online about how they do it. And the thing that really worked for me was that the kite flying is in two completely separate things, or separate parts. And so what we're doing is the launch, the takeoff, and the flying is one part, and the landing is another part. And if you can separate them in your mind, then you'll be able to take your back roll higher and higher and higher and higher. So here's an example of how it works. When we're taking off and launching up into the sky, that backhand that's on the bar has to fix that bar's position so that it doesn't come over your head. In fact, you should be able to even fly the kite while you're in the sky. So if you feel it goes a little bit too far behind, you can drive it forward with your wrist. If you feel it's a little too far forward, you can drive it back with your wrist while you're going into the sky. If you fix that bar position, you can basically spin around, and you'll see people doing multiple spins and all sorts of tricks up there. That's because they're keeping that kite really stable above their head. A common mistake is to accidentally send the kite too far back because you've only got one hand on the bar, and then people will crash. But to do it properly, we're going up, fixing our wrist, lifting ourselves up into the sky, floating around for as long as you feel like you want to, as high as you can go. That might only be 2 feet off the water, or it might be way up in the sky. Then as we're coming in for the landing, that's when we do the second part of the kite flying, and that is to do the loop. The loop is designed to help accelerate you. What it also does with the kite flying is that because we've fixed our wrist, because we've got the kite in the perfect position that we want, which is around about 12 or 1 hour off 12 in the direction of travel, then If it's 1 hour off 12 or slightly in front, what happens is as you start to bring that loop around across the top of your head, because the kite was on the other side of the window and it moves over 12 as it starts to do that loop, it lifts you up. So it takes that weight as well, because it sort of goes past and gives you that little bit of lift as it comes back around. I just wanted to give you some words of advice for doing the loop for the very first time. Do it on your 12 meter in light wind. What we're doing is we just get that back roll, spin around, loop it, and even if you throw the board around away at that, don't try and land on it, and just let the loop happen and slide on your stomach out into the water. That will get used to the motion of spinning around and then actually doing that loop. You can do that over and over and over again. If you do it, you know, you'll feel, okay, did I pull it too early? Did I pull it too late? If you pull it too early, you get sent too early. If you do it too late, you'll find you'll plonk in and then you'll get this acceleration. And so what you're looking for, the perfect timing, is to actually spin around, and then you'll feel as it's moving past 12, like I talked about, it'll give you that slight lift and acceleration, and you'll feel that really smooth landing. You can practice that in sort of on your 12 meter or 10 meter if you're a light rider. But just what I'm trying to say is, like, 15, 18 knots is a good time to just practice that, so that you don't feel overpowered when you're trying to practice that loop. Then you can bring it into the stronger winds for sure. I do that in all winds, that same landing. But that if you practice it in the light wind, then you'll find that you'll get that comfort level going, and then you'll be able to sort of bring that into the stronger winds. As well as that, in order to loop the kite around, sometimes it's nice to actually slide your hand across to the edge of the bar and then crank down on it. That tighter loop will keep the kite above your head more and give you more of the lift and less of the acceleration. If you loop the kite slowly around, keeping your hand close to the bar and just looping it slowly, it'll give you a big pull, like a lot of acceleration, but not much lift. So that's just something to keep in mind, and something that I find that I do is when I'm going through the rotation on the back roll, I'll go up, I'll sheet in to get the lift, I'll actually be spinning around, and then I'll sheet out slightly, move my hand across, and then crank down and in and the loop at the same time. So that's sort of what I'm doing with the bar as I'm rotating. I think another big problem that people have with getting the back roll dialed is actually reaching down too far to grab the board. So when you're coming in, like we talked about, you start to carve off that back foot, you're trying to poke the nose of the board up into the wind. Let that come up, so be patient with it. That was actually some of the best advice that I ever received personally about getting this back roll. Be patient and let the board come up to you, so you reach down and you grab it right here. The reason is that if you're too eager to get it, you'll reach down and that will actually throw you off axis, so you won't get the rotation properly, because what you want is it to come up and this shoulder to go back as you're rotating around. But when people reach down, they sort of roll in an awkward way. So one, be patient with that board as it's coming up. Another tip for you for grabbing the board is actually, where do you grab the board? It is tempting to just grab it right on the nose, it's the closest part, but the more control you have in the landing is determined by where you grab the board on the takeoff. So as you're popping that board up, if you can grab it further back, so closest to your front foot, it will give you the most control. Closest to the nose is going to give you the least control for the landing. So again, it comes down to having that patience and letting that board come up under your foot and trying to grab it right beside your front foot. That's going to help with that, the positioning. So as you're coming around for the landing, you'll really feel like you can put it right under your feet in a nice, sort of stable foot stance. If it's on your nose, you'll be reaching forward, and it makes it a lot harder to get it into the position that you need it. Because I see a lot of people, what they do is they might have a completion rate of, say, 50% on their back roll. And the reason that they're struggling with it is because they're sending the kite back at just the same amount of speed that they always do it. So they always go up, they do the back roll, the kite's slowly moving past 12, and then they loop it around to land it. And they do that same kite motion every time. But what that means is if they go a little too high, the kite will go too far back too early and they'll drop. If they go a little bit too low, they'll be looping it around a bit too fast and they'll get this massive acceleration and they'll get pulled. So the only time they land it is when they go the perfect amount of height for the amount of speed that they're bringing the kite over past 12 and then looping it around. And it's because they're not separating that kite flying motion into those two parts. So to go over it quickly again, as we're coming up, come up and think about, okay, I want that kite slightly in the forward motion, but at 12, as I'm spinning, holding it with my wrist, spinning around, and now I'm spotting my landing, and I can see, okay, I'm gonna come in right now, crank it and loop it down, and then that's your landing. That's the kite flying motion for the landing part of the trick. It's a skill in kite piloting that you can bring to like so many different tricks. You can do that with so many tricks, like I said, different rotations, front rotations, back rotations, board offs. All this stuff is being flown with the one hand, putting it in the position you want, and then doing that landing loop when you need it. Okay, so let's recap it one more time. We're heading across the wind in moderate speed in your comfortable riding stance. It's a good idea to learn this in your most comfortable riding stance direction. Iron up a chop, kite's at about 45 degrees. As we start to see that chop getting closer, start to move the kite up towards 12, but just in front of 12 in direction of travel. Start to carve aggressively upwind to get that nose up into the wind. At the same time, you need to sheet out with your backhand. Front hand comes off the bar. As you're popping off the chop, let that nose come right up, knee to chest, lift your knee up. That's gonna let that board come really close to your foot. Grab the board right next to your foot, and then you can sheet in slightly or sheet out and manage your height. It's depending on how high you wanna go. If you sheet in right now, you'll be able to go higher. Remember, we're locking that wrist and keeping that kite very fixed in that slightly forward motion as we're doing that. Do the rotation. You will already be spinning, but you can look over your shoulder to spin. And then as you spot your landing, we're gonna start coming in. I like to sheet out slightly, move my hand across, crank in that loop, put the board under my feet, and then we're riding out a 100% downwind. That's the direction we're always gonna be landing with these landing loops, is looking at 100% downwind. Okay, that's it for this video. Hopefully there's some tips in there that'll help you get out there and land your very first strapless board off backroll. Luke here from Flukes Kitesurfing, and we'll see you in coming tutorials.